And let's get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first webinar in our 2025 to 2026 Farm to Institution webinar series titled Voices of the Network. Next slide, Sarah. My name is Britt Florio, and I'm the Program Manager for Farm to Institution New England, and I'll be moderating the webinar. Also helping out on today's webinar is FINE's Director of Communications, Sarah Lyman. She'll also be keeping up with our chat and is here for tech support. So if you need help troubleshooting any tech issues, you can send Sarah Lyman a direct message in our chat box, and she'll be able to help troubleshoot. Sarah, can you go back? I'm looking for the slide about FINE. I'd like to briefly tell you a little bit about our organization. Farm to Institution New England, or FINE for short, is a dynamic network of communities, organizations, and institutions working together to create a just, equitable, and regenerative food system in New England and beyond. We believe institutions hold substantial power and wield significant influence in our food system through their food service, education, investment, employment, and land use. We know that developing institutional food value chains that are responsive to community needs and rooted in racial justice, food sovereignty, and climate resilience is a critical way to leverage the power of institutions to change the food system. The changes we seek can only be achieved when led by a collaborative, adaptive network committed to collective power and increased regional self-reliance. Here at FINE, we work to increase the amount of good local food served in our region's schools, colleges, hospitals, prisons, jails, and other institutions. Next slide. FINE has just embarked on a 3-year strategic plan with these 3 goals to guide us. First, we aim to create an organizational framework, structure, and culture that embodies the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We facilitate opportunities for relationship building and collaboration while centering the voices and needs of those most affected by food system inequities. And we focus on expanding the network's skills and capacity to cultivate an equitable and sustainable food system. For more information about FINE, please check out our website at farmtoinstitution.org. Sarah's going to put it right now in the chat for you all. I'd also like to tell you a little bit more about our webinar series. If you're here, then you've heard about the series and you're probably excited to hear from today's webinar speakers. But did you know that this is the first in a whole series of great presentations throughout this fall and winter? As a way to keep the energy going from this spring's Northeast Farm to Institution Summit, which took place in Portland, Maine in April, we're thrilled to host a monthly webinar series called Voices of the Network. Each month this fall and winter, you can tune in to learn about food waste in schools, farming for inclusion and healing, food justice in carceral settings, sustainable procurement, and so much more. Register for each webinar separately to join live, and we'll also send you the recordings afterwards. We'd like to thank the Henry P. Kendall Foundation for supporting FINE in this webinar series. In the chat, you'll find a link for more information. So today's webinar is titled From Intention to Action, Building Strategies for Sustained Local Food Procurement. We have 1 hour together where you will hear from 3 different speakers on the buyer's perspective from higher education, and then from K through 12 schools, and finally on to the producer's perspective. We'll make sure to leave time for questions. So if you have a question, please type it into the chat at any time. We'll aggregate those questions and save them for the Q&A at the end after each of our 3 speakers has had a chance to present. Also, at the end of this webinar, we'd be really grateful if you would answer a brief evaluation survey. It's only 2 questions to close things out. And right now, I'd love it if you could take a moment to share in the chat your name, organization, and what brings you here today. We also encourage you to share any other comments or information with the folks who are attending today's webinar. We have 3 speakers today who have more than 20 years of experience combined in connecting institutions with local food. Here to share their hard-earned lessons is Lexie Raczka, Sustainability Director for Boston University Dining Services, Sabrina Pashtan, Farm to School Manager with Boston Public Schools, and Kerry Kokkinogenis, Local Food Program Manager at the Sustainable Business Network of Massachusetts. I'm going to share more about each of these bios before each speaker has a chance to present. And so Lexie is going to kick us off, and I'd like to tell you more about her. Lexie Raczka is the Sustainability Director of Boston University Dining Services. She leads BU's dining sustainability initiatives, including local, sustainable, and diverse sourcing, waste reduction and diversion initiatives, low-impact menu programming, and more throughout the residential halls, retail locations, and even campus catering. She has worked in sustainable food systems in various capacities for more than a decade, including working on farms and with small nonprofits. Lexie has an MA in Agriculture, Food and Environment, and an MS in Urban and Environmental Policy and Planning, both from Tufts University, and a bachelor's degree from Dickinson College. I'm very pleased to put my virtual hands together for Lexie. Lexie, I turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Britt. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be able to speak with you today. Can we go to the next slide? So I am going to be speaking about Boston University Dining Services' local procurement journey and some of the history around our sourcing commitments and where we stand today and some of the strategic changes we've made to really increase our local sourcing over the past several years. If we can go to the next slide. A bit of background about BU Dining Services. We serve over 7 million meals each year to over 11,000 students participating in a meal plan, along with additional members of the campus community and visitors to campus as well. We operate 23 different locations under the BU Dining umbrella, including 4 all-you-care-to-eat dining halls, 16 retail locations, and 3 catering operations. And local and sustainable sourcing have been really paramount to our operations for well over a decade. In FY24, we spent about $3 million on local and/or sustainable purchases. And while they're lumped in the same bucket, the majority of these purchases did meet our local sourcing criteria. Next slide. So a little bit of background on our local sourcing efforts. Historically, we have established many different targets and metrics about local sourcing, and we've done this for well over a decade. But these goals were often established at the top and sort of owned by executive leadership at the top of BU Dining, as well as our partners in auxiliary services on campus as well. And so they didn't necessarily permeate through levels of our operations down to the folks actually doing the purchasing in our locations. And so there were often disconnects between the products that we sought out to purchase and the commitments that we were trying to meet and what was actually happening at the location level. Additionally, when we first sought out to achieve local sourcing targets, one of the first priorities was focusing on high-cost items. The reason being that our local sourcing targets are based on a percentage of total spend, and the thought was if we went after high-value items like beef, that would be a very easy way to check the box and move a significant portion of our spend from non-local to local. We've since changed that approach over the last decade or so. Additionally, over the history of our sourcing endeavors, our criteria around local sourcing has fluctuated. We've always used a 250-mile radius from campus to define the distance of local products, but there have been changes in terms of business ownership and other aspects of the business where it was headquartered and things like that that have changed over time, which led our percentage of local sourcing to increase or decrease and cause some confusion as we were trying to achieve different metrics annually. Some challenges that we have faced and continue to face, and I think any institutional buyer on the call probably experiences as well, include product quality. Especially being an educational institution, we want to make sure that we are educating students and other members of the university community about the high quality products that are available locally. So it's really important to us that we always lead our purchasing decisions with quality and aren't just adding something that's local to our portfolio just because it's local if it isn't meeting at least the quality of the product that it's replacing, if not surpassing it, because we don't want someone to perceive local as inferior quality, because we know that's not the case, but we're just very particular about what we put out and what that message presents. Additionally, we face challenges around limited storage space, and this can be a particular problem for local vendors who are only able to deliver once or twice a week and trying to find space to fit their products in our tight spaces in our kitchens, and trying to identify how much we're actually able to purchase and how that compares to our actual usage volumes, and how we can maneuver to purchase as much as possible, but within our space constraints. Product availability also presents a challenge, and this exists in a few different ways. The seasonality of what's in season in New England is often at odds with the higher education calendar, and so figuring out what we're actually able to source regularly throughout the academic year, especially things that we can source consistently to really tell a story on a regular basis about our vendor partners and the products that are being offered. Additionally, what types of products are available at the scale that we need in order to ideally fully replace a non-local product with something local in our offerings, as well as availability that may change as our vendor partners experience different changes and challenges to their business. We've unfortunately seen a number of our vendor partners go out of business over the last few years, which has taken a huge hit to our local sourcing efforts, as well as some other partners have actually relocated their facilities outside of our local sourcing radius, which has impacted our sourcing abilities as well. Another challenge is around purchase reporting. If you have a goal, it's really important that you have clear and accurate data to be able to track your progress towards that goal. And historically, we were doing a lot of manual reporting with Excel spreadsheets with tens of thousands of rows, and it was a very arduous process. And because of all of the time required, there was often a significant lag between when the purchases were made and when we were reporting on them. And so there wasn't much flexibility to make changes in real time to increase our sourcing efforts if they weren't hitting the targets that we had anticipated. Next slide. So several years ago, we decided to develop a local sourcing strategy and really focus on our local sourcing efforts in a new way. So one of the first things we did was bring more decision makers to the table. So we have a monthly sustainable sourcing strategy meeting that when we first started was actually twice a month. And at this meeting, we have representation from all of our operational units, as well as a few members of our culinary team and executive leadership as well. And this is an opportunity to talk about our existing vendor partners, what expectations we have on sourcing, how things are actually playing out, what types of roadblocks we're seeing, and how we can maneuver around them to increase our sourcing however needed, as well as identify what new vendors or products are we thinking of for adding into our portfolio. What's the next thing that we want to try to tackle? We've also shifted our perspective on sourcing opportunities. I mentioned that previously we were going after the high cost items. We decided to instead focus on the breadth of our local sourcing portfolio and look at opportunities that may not account for a large percentage of our spend, but through making all sorts of small changes, we collectively could significantly increase our local efforts, and we could pilot things at one location, and through the success of that could then ramp that up and expand it across other locations as well. So bringing products into our portfolio that we may not have considered previously. We also really focused on execution before marketing, and it goes against, I think, a lot of the things we want to do as a higher education institution about educating students and telling our story, but we wanted to make sure that we were telling our story about something that was authentic and true. So we focused for almost a year on just operationalizing some of these new local partnerships that we created to prove that we could do so on our end as well as on the vendor end, that the product was meeting our expectations in terms of quality, delivery. We weren't seeing any challenges that would challenge the longevity of these partnerships. And so once we had a proven track record that everything was working really well, then we really started telling that story broadly, whether it be signage that's in our dining halls on a daily basis, highlighting what's local, or social posts or events or things like that. We've also sped up our data analysis process, which has been huge for allowing us to have more real-time insights into how we're tracking towards our goals, and allowed us more flexibility to make changes in closer to real time as we're assessing our progress. And then finally, we've really leaned on engaging and educating our team, and this can take a number of different forms. It includes empowering our team to host different types of events. April is a great opportunity, it being Earth Month. We had a lot of events last year where dining locations were highlighting different vendor partners and doing collaborations with either existing menu items or creating new menu items to highlight these local vendor partners. So that's a great way to engage and excite folks and give folks a little bit of creative liberties while still staying within the confines of our existing local partnerships. Education also looks like taking folks on our team out to see the farms that we're sourcing from, to meet the folks who are producing our food and understand the stories behind that and the value of sourcing locally, so that when they're placing an order, they understand why it may take a few extra steps to order from our food hub than order through a broadline distributor, but they know the value of doing so. And then also taking some fun engagement opportunities to set some friendly competitions amongst locations as well, and setting goals around local sourcing and having each location compete against each other in terms of how much they're sourcing locally on a semesterly basis. Next slide. So these are several of our local vendor partners, but in no way is this an exhaustive list. I want to call out a couple of vendor partners that have been especially crucial to our efforts over the last several years. Boston Food Hub is a vendor that we started working with about a year and a half ago, and has really revolutionized our ability to source local produce, and has, I think, shocked us in the variety of produce that we're able to get still during the winter months in New England. And that's been a really great opportunity to have fresh local produce on a daily basis across all of our locations, which has been really instrumental. Another vendor partner that has been huge has been Cape Ann Lobsterman. Every year in September, we host a lobster dinner to welcome students back to campus, or to campus if they're new. And a couple years ago, we began partnering with Cape Ann Lobsterman, which has been a great opportunity to source lobsters directly from the folks pulling the traps and keeping more money in their pockets, while also making it more economically viable for us to source locally sourced lobsters as well. We have a number of other vendor partners, especially in the value added space, whether it be coffee roasters or soup or hot sauce as well, that really help to round out our portfolio and provide offerings that are available on a daily basis throughout the entire academic year as well, providing some consistency for our storytelling, which can be huge for just the overall messaging of our program. Next slide. So what is the impact? We've seen a lot of great engagement from students, community members, our staff over the last several years of increasing our local efforts, whether it be through events in pop-up markets, or special dinners in our dining halls, or just things available on a regular basis. So I wanted to provide a couple of quotes. One from a student responding to our bringing Jim's Organic Coffee, a locally roasted organic coffee, to our dining halls at the beginning of this calendar year, sending a quick note that she recognized that the cost of the coffee was likely higher than what we were paying previously, and there were probably a lot of steps required to those logistics, but seeing the impact of that. So getting messages from students, whether it be about the switch of our coffee or other local vendors that we've added to our portfolio portfolio really helps to show that people are getting the message and understanding the why behind our actions, and hopefully influencing them to make different changes once they leave the university as well. Next slide. And then one last quote from one of our production managers who's really embraced our partnership with Boston Food Hub. It's a long quote, but I really want to highlight that through that partnership, he has seen really high quality produce, including varieties that are not available through our other distribution channels, and often seeing higher yields, while also seeing the paying it forward benefits of supporting local farmers, as well as access to fresh local produce for food insecure communities. So really helping our teams to understand the win-win of these local sourcing endeavors, and that we're benefiting from higher quality items, getting higher yields, seeing products that we might not see otherwise, while also paying it back to our local community. So I'm happy to answer questions later, but with that, I will pass it along.
Thanks so much. For those who are coming in a little late, that we just heard from Lexie Raczka, the Sustainability Director for Boston University Dining Services. If you have a question about something she just said, then please feel free to put it in the chat and we'll save it for the Q&A at the end. The next presenter that I have the privilege of introducing you to is Sabrina Pashtan. Sabrina is the Farm to School Manager for Boston Public Schools. Within food and nutrition services, she works closely with menu planning, procurement, and logistics to increase and diversify local food purchases that meet the standards for the Good Food Purchasing Program. She also focuses on student and family engagement that relate to food literacy and building our food community. Prior to coming to BPS, she was a food literacy educator for the middle schoolers, a culinary educator for food service workers with the John C. Stalker Institute for Food and Nutrition, and the sustainability coordinator for the Boston University Dining Services. Sabrina attended culinary school at La Escuela de Cocina Luis Irizar in San Sebastian. I'm sorry if I did not get that name correct, Sabrina, in Spain, and has a degree in international studies from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And with that, I'd love to turn it over to Sabrina.
Thank you, Britt. I'm so happy to be here today. So I'm going to be providing the framework that we have in place for local procurement at BPS, as well as strategies that we employ to maximize local food, recent progress we've made, and challenges that we've encountered along the way. So this is a snapshot of our district, which we have about 47,000 students, and we serve about 48,000 meals per day from 123 schools currently. Next slide, please. And I want to highlight our strategic priorities, which are part of our 5-year strategic plan, because they really provide the framework for our daily operations, including procurement. And so everything we do is very intentional and works towards meeting these goals. And that helps so much in terms of our values-based procurement. So we are working towards scratch cooking from whole ingredients without additives. We are making dishes that are culturally relevant to our local community and student population. We strive to be financially sustainable with the use of local and values-based procurement. And we use the Good Food Purchasing Program to inform our decisions on what food to buy. And I will go further into this on the next slide. And then, not quite yet for the slide. Thank you. And lastly, I want to mention the importance of supporting our staff in all of these initiatives. That's a very big part of what we do, and I'll speak to that as well. Next slide. The Good Food Purchasing Program is something that we have adopted as a result of an ordinance that was passed by the City of Boston in 2019, which requires BPS to adhere to the good food standards outlined by the Good Food Purchasing Program, and they really define our menu and operations in terms of the kinds of foods that we serve. And so it's been incredibly instrumental in our current program. There's I'll just give a very short overview, but there's five standards as part of the Good Food Program. And so in terms of our vendors, we're looking at their workforce, which for us is often relevant in terms of vendors that have contracts with union contracts. Animal welfare is another standard, environmental sustainability, which includes sustainable seafood, community health and nutrition, which takes into account our nutritional guidelines and things like prohibited ingredients and additives on our menu, and then local and community-based economies, which is most relevant for today, and our definition of what we consider local is in line with the state of Massachusetts and includes all the New England states, and we are in the process of adding New York State to that as well, to be in line with the state of Massachusetts Department of Education. Next slide, please. This is a snapshot of our last assessment with the Good Food Purchasing Program, which was in school year 23-24, so just 2 years ago. And it gives you an idea of the kind of metrics that we are following in our purchasing. Next slide, please. So we have pretty concrete goals, which we've worked to create both as a district, Boston Public Schools, as the largest food buyer for the city of Boston, and within being a member of the Good Food Purchasing Program. And so on our last assessment, we were at 18% local. Our goal for this year is 20%, next year 25%, and by school year 29-30%. So those are pretty aggressive, ambitious goals that we're working towards. And an important part of our food procurement is also prioritizing and supporting minority vendors and impacted suppliers. And so we have very concrete goals also associated with that. So 5% of our local spend needs to come from minority and impacted suppliers for the Good Food Purchasing Program, and through the City of Boston, 10% of our total spend needs to come from minority and impacted suppliers. And so a lot of the initiatives that we and our work today is working to diversify our farmers and vendors as part of this. Next slide. So what are we doing to increase our local spend? So one of the most important aspects for us is integrating the local purchasing into our RFP process. So all the food that we buy has to go through a public bidding process. And so we, in working with the Center for Good Food Purchasing, have integrated local requirements for items that we've identified that we want to ensure we will source locally. And so it lets, for example, if we have butternut squash on our RFP for next year, we will only let people bid on that are within our definition of local. And then we can also take it further to include other attributes such as BIPOC or women-owned, and in that way we're working to really institutionalize these aspects of our procurement. A lot of the fresh vegetables that we get are pre-processed before they come into our kitchens, so that helps support production and cooking in our many schools, which can be complicated. And so whether that happens on the farms that have processing capabilities, or through our produce distributor, we do get a lot of pre-processed local food, and that really helps us maximize what we can serve in our kitchens because it saves so much on time and labor. And we participate in the Massachusetts Farm to School Harvest of the Month program, which is a way for us to feature locally grown foods each month. And it's also a great way to communicate this with the students, to talk about what we're doing, to do samplings in the schools, and just to highlight and educate as well. Next slide. So a big part of our local program is, while we're trying to scratch cook in our kitchens, a big part of that is outsourcing scratch cooking. So buying food that's been already produced by local partners. And it's a great way for us to support small local producers and serve their food in our schools. So some of these folks here on this slide are these are some of our local producers. So we have Del Sur Empanadas. They provide our empanadas across the district. Our tortillas are coming from Mi Tierra, which uses locally grown corn to make their corn tortillas. We are buying a field pea fritter from Commonwealth Kitchen here in Dorchester in Boston, and they make what is essentially a falafel made from a cover crop that was previously going to waste. So that's one of our plant-based options. It's like a falafel ball. The next photo here is Fresh Food Generation, and they make a jerk marinade for us, which we use for chicken and for a rasta pasta, a Jamaican pasta that we make. And then our bagels are coming from One Mighty Mill, which uses organic, locally grown wheat. Next slide, please. So we also, as part of our commitment to the Good Food Purchasing Program, only source sustainable seafood. And so we buy all of our seafood from Red's Best, which is a local company here that sources from local fishermen, and it's all sustainably sourced. And then we also utilize a kelp. Our veggie burgers are using a local kelp product as well. So we're trying to emphasize our plant-based options as a way to lower our carbon footprint and also to support local producers. So another item on here that you can see is our 3-bean chili, where we utilize beans that have been grown in Western Massachusetts by one of our partner farms. Next slide. So what are some of the challenges that we've encountered? As I mentioned, all of our food has to come through a public bidding process. And so that means that if at any point during the year we want to change something to locally grown that may not have made it onto the bid, we have to solicit three bids and always choose the lowest price. So that can be quite challenging when it comes to being kind of agile and flexible with local procurement, and also with growing season challenges and things like that. We have a 4-week cycle menu, which provides a stable and easier way for our staff to prepare meals throughout the year. But what that means is that there's not a lot of flexibility for seasonality on our menu. So that's something that we have to work towards, is being able to incorporate seasonal produce onto our menu, which stays the same and just cycles through from September through June. We have a long and complex purchasing process for our large district with over 120 schools. And so that means that we have to purchase food that has a longer shelf life. And so certain foods can be very challenging for us because it could be 2 weeks from when we order the item until when we finally serve it. And so things like local strawberries can be very challenging. And this is actually our first year that we're trying to do a lot more seasonal produce, which requires a lot more agility. And we've seen a lot of challenges, and we're trying to learn from them. Like one example is melon is picked at a much riper state locally than it is through the global food system. And so we've had issues with the melon by the time it gets closer to us is completely rotten. So especially when working with smaller farmers that are not accustomed to institutional procurement, it's really a partnership in everyone understanding how we can make changes so that it works for everyone. So like picking things at a less ripe stage is an example of what will be some lessons learned. So as I mentioned, we have over 120 schools. And so what that means is that we can't have farms delivering directly to each school. And we have to rely on our distribution partners. So that can definitely be challenging. It means we have to have more hands between the farm and the school. And then lastly, our participation rate. So for those of you familiar with K through 12, the way that we fund our program is through federal reimbursement, and that is determined by how many meals are taken on a daily basis. In Boston, we have free universal meals, so students can get a free meal on any day of the school year, but we are challenged by participation rates, which so students have various perceptions of the food that's served. And so one of our big tasks over the next several years is marketing and education about what is actually going into our food, because we actually haven't done any until now. And parents and kids don't really know they don't know about the great food that we're serving. And so we have a big task ahead of us, and in increasing our participation rate so that we can in turn increase our revenue. And next slide, please. So this year, this is our first year with the farm to school coordinator, me. And some of the exciting things that we have had is in the beginning of the year, we invited one of our farmers, Addison Toussaint, to come to our back to school training for our staff. We have about 500 staff members across the district. And so Addison is a local farmer. He provided his tomatoes for our salad bar this fall. And he came and spoke to our staff about his experience as an immigrant farmer. And it was very impactful and exciting to have him there and for our staff to be able to make the connection with a local farmer and understand the challenges that he has gone through to get where he is, and also the joy that he gets in providing food for our schools. So it was a really beautiful connection. And so we've typically been working with larger farms until now because that's what we were able to do with the limited capacity, but we're really trying to diversify and support small farmers and vendors, which comes with a lot of challenges, but ultimately that's really our goal. So we have Tim up here from Bronte Farms. He's providing all of our cabbage next month for our fish tacos. And we are also starting education and outreach, as I mentioned, so that students start to understand where their food is coming from. So in the bottom left-hand corner, we have a lettuce tasting event at the Boston Green Academy where students got to taste all the varieties of lettuce that's being grown on the shipping container farm that is on their campus. And it was really exciting for students to make that connection. And then we also have developed a menu task force in the district, and that's a democratic method of decision making that we have employed to make decisions across the district according to what we will be serving throughout the year. And it's a great way for us to take everyone's perspective and account into experience in decision making. So very exciting. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide. So is there maybe we're having technical problems, but that's it for me. Feel free to follow us on Instagram and Facebook. I have the QR code. There we are. That's the QR code. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. That was Sabrina, the farm to school manager for Boston Public Schools. If you have a question for Sabrina, feel free to put it in the chat. And next, I would like to introduce our third and final speaker. Since graduating with an MA in health communication in 2008, Kerry Kokkinogenis has sought to address health disparities in a variety of ways, including studying and addressing the bigger picture factors that impact health and wellness, including food, strong local communities, and economic opportunities. In 2016, Kerry opened a local-focused brick-and-mortar food store selling only food grown or produced in the Northeast region, and more recently pivoted to a farm-to-home delivery model. After joining the Sustainable Business Network team in 2023, Kerry has been employing the skills and experience of those varied endeavors to support local food businesses, farmers, and fisheries with SBN. Thanks so much for joining us. Kerry, over to you.
Thank you very much, Britt. We can start with the first slide. I've seen my smile. Fantastic. So I just wanted to share a little bit about those endeavors. At Wildflower Pantry, it was about 3 years we were running. We were great at creating a space people enjoyed, not as good at selling food. But we did reach out to and work with dozens and dozens and dozens of different vendors, both distributors and producers and farms and whatnot. We also did some sales, business to business sales, where we did some catering for local business and that kind of thing. When we switched over to farm to door direct, it was right before the world shut down, if everybody remembers. And we rode that wave. And a significant part of that was also providing for small businesses that were too small for a lot of the distributors to bring the kind of small farm produce that they were looking for. We started that business with 4 farms, and during that wave, we expanded to include over 30 different food vendors, baking and popsicles and just all kinds of things, sauces and whatnot. And as noted, now with the local food program, I'm the local food program director. We do a local food trade show. With the Franklin County Community Development folks, we do the wholesale readiness program, wholesale matchmaking, all kinds of fabulous and beautiful things. We can move to the next slide. Through these endeavors and listening, spending a lot of time listening to and working with food producers, farms and others, there are a variety of kinds of considerations and why they want to get into selling to institutions. Consistent ordering stabilizes their sales. It's particularly relevant for farms and other food businesses that are trying to get to a year-round model or income business model. Order size, it obviously simplifies their logistics if they can do a large order than lots and lots of smaller orders, and it decreases their time spent on sales. It diversifies their channels in a different sort of way by reaching different audiences. As we saw during the COVID disruptions, being dependent on one particular channel, for example, restaurants or grocery only, can become a weakness when the unexpected happens. And it connects them with different kinds of audiences, potentially reaching audiences that were unexpected or not previously reached, people that they didn't think to reach out to. Next slide, please. But there are a lot of challenges. My colleagues talked about some of the challenges from their side, and they have corresponding challenges from the producer side. For example, Lexie talked about the moving from a top-down model to a more inclusive model. From the producer side, that looks like not knowing who the right people are, how to connect with them. Building relationships takes time, but also it starts with introductions, and figuring out who those people are can be a challenge from the outside. There was conversation about scale. Sabrina talked about the consistency of the product. All of these kinds of things are things that the producers are also working on. How much can they commit to? How frequently can they do it? If anytime there's a single source, there's potential for supply disruptions, whether that is at a global scale, as we've seen in recent years, or also in recent years, climatic change disrupting farms. Well-established potato farms lost hundreds of acres of potatoes, for example, a few years back in some serious flooding. And then there's also the consistency of being able to produce the same quality of product throughout the year or throughout the season, when we know that, if you have a garden, you've seen the flowers look very different at the beginning of their blooming than the end of their blooming. Logistics can also be a challenge. As much as it simplifies their logistics, it can also make them more challenging. How do you get the food from their farm or facility to you? Sabrina talked about having 123 schools. And Lexie talked about working with Food Hub, Boston Local Food Hub, to address this. And then there's the pricing question. Can the institution afford to pay the price that the producer has to charge? Is there an overlap? Is there a point of connection where we can meet each other? The next slide. Some of the strategies that have worked include aggregators and farm farmer-producer coalitions. Fairly recently, Three River Farms Alliance was out of New Hampshire. Crown of Maine is another farmer-producer coalition out of Maine. There's also food hubs and distributors, such as the Boston Food Hub. Coastal Food Shed is just in Southeast Massachusetts. Farm Fresh Rhode Island, somewhat self-explanatory. And Food Connects, which is out of Vermont. We have for-profit distributors that are also looking specifically in this farm to institution or farm to business field. Native Maine and Myers Produce and Marty's Local, Specialty Foods New England. Rainforest Distribution is not only in New England. Unify and KeHE are also not only in New England, for those of you who are other parts of the country. And Farm Fresh Rhode Island, Food Connects, Crown of Maine are all distributors. They're also nonprofits, so they kind of serve multiple roles. And then another area that was brought up was the value-added products, lightly processed, peeled, chopped, frozen, or sauces and salad mixes. One of the pictures that Lexie shared include crack sauce, who's done a great job of getting into institutions as a hot sauce. And Sabrina talked about those field pea patties, the field pea falafel. And I have an 11-year-old in the Boston Public Schools, and I've heard some good things about that field pea falafel. And they are one of your more suspicious ones. If you can, when you turn them over, I know you have won over the entire district. If we can move to the next slide. So each strategy then comes with its own set of questions or challenges to work with. Getting in with an aggregator, food hubs, distributors, you're back to that building relationships question. Who do you reach out to? Who do you find? Are the distributors that the institutions are using accessible to local farms and producers? Both of these institutions that have joined us today have a baked-in commitment that they've talked about, which is important. And when the distributors that the institutions are using already are not accessible to local food, it becomes a major challenge. Does the farm have the capacity or access to the capacity? I saw that question in the chat, and that is a major one. We work with some of the food processors that make that possible, like Fork Food Lab, Western Mass Food Processing Center, and City Seed down in Connecticut. These are all regional to New England. Our definition at Boston Local Food Program is New England is local. We're not hating on anybody else's definition, just letting that known. And does processing make the food more or less shelf stable? Sabrina touched on this with the question of you get a better quality melon when you pick it closer to ripeness, but then it goes bad fast. That same melon, once you've peeled it, starts going bad faster as well. Whereas if you've sauced something or jarred it, or frozen, if it can be frozen, those kinds of things will make it last longer. And does that processing then add or decrease deliveries and storage, logistics, and costs? Kitchen Garden Farm does a great product, and but that jar issue then becomes a cost and a weight issue when you start shipping it, and then it breaks on it when it's en route, and who's responsible for it. And it's a whole nother conversation. So all of these things make it all very complicated and so very worthwhile, and it's what we are doing every day. And we can go to the last slide. I'd love to connect with you all. We're on Facebook and Instagram at Boston Local Food, super easy to follow. And if you are in New England, I would love to see you at the Local Food Trade Show, which is coming up in January. And at bostonlocalfood.org, you can find all the information. And I am done so that we can open up to questions. I told you I'd be fast.
You did wonderfully. All of our speakers were fantastic. Thank you, Kerry. Thank you, Sabrina. Thank you, Lexie. We have a lot of great questions in the chat. We're going to get into them now. We're going to even stay a little bit past 1 o'clock so we can get to some of these questions. If you are in the audience and you need to leave, I understand, but then you can rewatch the recording later to get some of these questions answered. So one of the first ones that came in is from Cheryl. Cheryl's curious about the capacity of school kitchens in Boston to cook from scratch, since infrastructure has been a big challenge in New York City. So Sabrina, can you tell us more about what the school kitchen infrastructure is that allows scratch cooking? We will be grateful for that info. Let us know.
Yeah, so we We have outfitted a lot of our kitchens with some cooking equipment in the past several years from foundation and grant money. So we have a steam oven in every location that is able to cook. And so we make sure that whatever recipe we're cooking can be made in that oven. So it's quite challenging from that perspective. And our long-term plan is that we have just built a central production kitchen that we will be able to do some of the cooking out of and then deliver it to our schools through our internal distribution network.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Our next question, Kerry, you started to answer it, but I want to open up to see if the other speakers have things to add. The question's from Michelle. It's around pre-processed items. So pre-processed fruits and vegetables is a huge barrier for entry for many farmers, at least for farmers that they're working with in California. So Michelle is curious about how your produce distributors navigate working with pre-processed items, and are they able to purchase from smaller scale farmers? So do your large distributors work with pre-processed items, or are you all doing more like direct sales for some of that pre-processed stuff?
So we, as I mentioned, a lot of the produce that we buy is being processed either on the farm or at our by our distributor. And so we've really been working on facilitating the process between our produce distributor who does the processing and being able to accommodate small farms and working on that process in terms of making sure that they have all the safety certifications and ensuring that the produce is in the correct state when it arrives in order to be processed in a way that works for them.
Great.
So I know that a few of the nonprofits in New England have intentionally and mindfully built out the ability to do that. Fork Food Lab, when we went to visit them last year, was in the process of building out some of their facility. They already had some of it already built out. I know Western Mass Food Processing Center does that. I'd love to hear which one, Sabrina, you guys are working with. But it's not typically it's not your typical distributor that does it. It's more often an organization that's there specifically to serve in those kinds of roles, connecting farms with stability and purchasing, including institutions.
Great. Lexie, did you want to add anything to that question? If not, I have a separate one for you.
No, I would say ditto to everything that's been shared.
Yeah. So I guess two questions here. One is Boston University an independent food program?
We are not a self-operated program at Boston University.
Okay. The other question for you, Lexie, is where would you recommend an institution that's early in its local sourcing efforts begin?
It's a great question. I would say it's a good place to figure out what your biggest opportunity effort is and try to identify what types of vendor partners you're already working with that might fit your local umbrella, and then what types of products might be easy to attain. I wouldn't necessarily encourage going after our previous method of going after the highest spend, but really trying to find the right products and the right partners to start. And really from the start, engage all layers of your team in those conversations to make sure people understand the why behind it. I think if you can get that buy-in early on, I think you can have a lot more engagement and a lot more people checking in on the success so that you're really hitting those targets and having more eyes on the conversation.
Great answer. Thanks, Lexie. Next question is for you, Sabrina. It comes from Jennifer, who says, love the BPS Sea to School program, exclamation mark. What's the most common form of seafood BPS purchases from the local fishermen? Is it like filet, patty, etc.? And do the fishermen have processing capacity themselves, or do they rely on others to process?
Well, so we currently, as a district, do not purchase any raw protein. So we rely on Red's Best, our fish purveyor, they buy the fish from all of the fishermen that provide for the company, and then they process it and they actually cook it, and then package it and freeze it, send it to us, and then we essentially heat it up in our kitchens. So as someone asked about from New York about limited capacity, this is one of the ways that we deal with limited capacity in schools with very limited equipment and staff and space, is that we are relying on our fish purveyor to acquire the fish, to process it, to cook it, and to send it to us. And then we heat it up and serve it to the kids. And that being said, we currently source a patty for a fish sandwich and fish sticks like for a fish taco. But we are starting a raw fish pilot next year and hope to start cooking some fish, some raw fish. But that's for next year.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to ask all the presenters one more question. And while they're answering this final question, I would love for the remaining participants who are still here to fill out our poll. Sarah's going to launch a poll. It's simple, 2 questions. It helps us evaluate what worked about this webinar, what you learned, and what your takeaway is. So feel free to complete that. And my final question for our presenters today is, are there food service companies that are more on board and demonstrate the flexibility and willingness to make these farm to institution approaches work? And that question is from Jamie. You need me to read it again?
I think from my perspective, I don't necessarily know if there are food companies that are more or less on board. I think oftentimes the contract structure can vary what programs might look like on different campuses. But I think from my experience, all of the different food companies, or at least the major food companies, have commitments around local sourcing. There may be some vendors that are easier or harder to work with, but I don't think there's ever a stopgap preventing different types of partnerships from forming or growing over time.
Great. Thanks, Lexie. Do our speakers have any final closing thoughts, short 1 to 2 sentences that you'd like to say before I give my closing comments?
I just want to thank everyone for joining us and exploring these questions with us, because they are multifaceted and systemic and constantly moving, and it's a constant conversation.
Absolutely. And you can find our speakers through the websites that they provided that Sarah has shared in the chat. You could also contact them directly. If they're willing, they can put their emails in the chat if you have follow-up questions or comments. Thank you for continuing to fill out the webinar evaluation. And Sarah, can you go to the next slide for me, please? We have a lot of great webinars coming up as part of the series. As I said, this is the first of many. The next one will happen on December 17th. It's about care farming. Folks are going to talk about what is care farming, what is the care farming network, what are they doing to build healing and inclusive spaces, especially for folks with disabilities, and a deep desire for some of these farms to source to more institutions. So tune into that on December 7th. Then in January, we're going to be talking about prison food and prison research. In February, we hear from Bon Appetit about lessons learned of local sourcing. And in March, we're going to hear more about school food. So you have to register for each of these webinars individually, and we really look forward to seeing you there on the next ones. And finally, just a big thank you. We want to thank the Henry P. Kendall Foundation for supporting FINE's work. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. Thank you to our amazing speakers with a wealth of knowledge and information. And we look forward to connecting with you all soon. I hope everyone has a great day. Bye.